thinking kills. First your silence, then your connections with people, and finally, perhaps, yourself. And loneliness becomes an invisible wall surrounding you, even in a crowd. Thoughts often seem like a refuge, a place where the mind can wander freely, yet this refuge is deceptive. It masks the deepest solitude, a solitude that grows more intense the more one explores their inner world. Overthinking appears liberating, as if understanding everything could bring freedom. But in reality, it binds the thinker in chains of their own making. Each question leads to another, and each answer dissolves into more questions. The mind becomes a labyrinth, with corridors that twist upon themselves, rooms filled with reflections of desires, regrets, fears, and contradictions. As one wanders these corridors, the outside world begins to fade. Conversations feel superficial, laughter hollow, and the simplest exchanges lose meaning. The thinker observes others engaging with the surface of life, while they grapple with the currents of depth that cannot be shared. Every thought isolates further. The more one seeks understanding, the more bridges to others crumble. In social settings, one participates in words, yet internally debates ideas of freedom, morality, pain, and existence. The questions that arise are too heavy to articulate, and even if expressed, they are often met with misunderstanding or dismissal. Thus, loneliness becomes not only external but internal, a wall not just between oneself and others, but between the self that observes and the self that interacts. Dostoyevsky's characters embody this tension. Raskolnikov constructs courts of conscience and guilt within his mind, weighing every intention, every act, and every impulse. Ivan Karamazov grapples with justice, God, and morality, feeling alienated from the world while questioning its foundations. Krylov seeks freedom and meaning in a landscape of despair and philosophical uncertainty. Each character illustrates the same principle. Thought can illuminate, yet it simultaneously distances. Awareness comes at a price, and that price is isolation. Overthinking fosters internal courts where one becomes prosecutor, witness, and defendant simultaneously. Decisions, judgments, and self-reproach swell endlessly. Conscience punishes hope, and reason attacks desire. The mind becomes a tribunal of contradictions, a place where clarity is never final, and resolution is elusive. In this space, the self is confronted with every shadow, every unspoken thought, every fear or desire that society discourages acknowledging. This confrontation sharpens awareness, yet intensifies solitude. The mind's search for meaning brings both insight and estrangement. Everyday pleasures become shallow. Humor, conversation, and temporary distractions no longer satisfy. The thinker seeks depth, connections and understanding that mirror the intensity of their inner world, but such resonance is rare. Most people remain content with surface-level interactions, unable to sustain the weight of these explorations. Consequently, the thinker retreats into solitude, constructing a personal island within their consciousness. This island is a sanctuary because it allows honest self-reflection, yet it is also a labyrinth, because escape is uncertain and often unsettling. The thinker discovers the limits of themselves and others, realizing that human connection often cannot extend to the places their mind wanders. Over time, this solitude shapes identity. Awareness of one's own depth brings freedom, the freedom to act independently of societal expectation or approval, but also a profound burden. The thinker learns that understanding oneself requires courage, and that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. Within this paradox, isolation and insight coexist. One loses ordinary comfort yet gains authenticity. One suffers yet grows. One fears yet liberates themselves. In grappling with contradictions, loneliness becomes not a punishment, but a teacher. It confronts, challenges, and refines the self, compelling the thinker to reconcile with their own reality. In this solitude, the thinker begins to map the intricate web of their own mind, noticing how every thought, emotion, and memory interlaces with the next. What once seemed simple, a fleeting mood, a passing doubt, a minor decision, now unfolds into layers of consequence and meaning. Every reflection sharpens awareness, yet simultaneously intensifies the sense of isolation. Ordinary moments feel smaller, trivial in comparison to the vastness of the internal landscape, where questions of freedom, morality, and existence echo endlessly. The mind becomes a theater of light and shadow, where insights illuminate some truths, while contradictions and unresolved fears loom like towering walls. Each realization brings both clarity and discomfort, a reminder that the self cannot be fully known without confronting the depths that most prefer to ignore. In this labyrinth, the thinker is both observer and participant. Wandering corridors lined with echoes of past regrets, present anxieties, and future uncertainties. Memories replay with new interpretations, thoughts collide with emotions, and desires challenge conscience. Each internal debate opens new chambers of understanding, but also new doors to doubt. The thinker begins to notice patterns, how fear often disguises itself as reason, how desire can masquerade as morality, how hope and despair intertwine in ways that cannot be untangled. Every step forward is both discovery and reckoning, and every insight carries a weight that ordinary interactions cannot carry. The thinker realizes that relationships, conversations, and even laughter now feel distant, because most people cannot follow the mind into these depths. Yet within this isolation, a fragile clarity emerges. The thinker learns to confront the recurrence of their fears, to recognize the illusions they cling to, and to accept the complexity of their own existence without needing immediate answers. The solitude becomes a mirror, reflecting both the brilliance and the darkness within. It is a teacher, relentless yet impartial, showing that growth is inseparable from discomfort, that freedom is inseparable from responsibility, and that self-awareness demands courage in the face of truths most would rather avoid. Here, the thinker finds both power and vulnerability, insight and burden, discovery and loss, understanding that to know oneself fully is to walk alone, yet not without purpose. The labyrinth of thought can become so intricate that it seems almost physical, as if the walls of the mind press in and the air grows thick with reflection. Memory, imagination, and anticipation intertwine, amplifying both fear and wonder. Questions of free will, moral choice, suffering, and the meaning of life occupy every moment. Each answer seems to open a dozen more, and in this perpetual seeking, the thinker discovers the vastness of their own consciousness. At times, the mind becomes a storm, a relentless examination of self, morality, and existence. Each revelation brings insight, but also a reminder of separation from the ordinary, the easy, and the shared. Yet this loneliness is not meaningless. It is a crucible where identity is forged. In solitude, one confronts contradictions directly. One sees desires, fears, weaknesses, and strengths in raw form. The thinker learns to navigate their internal chaos, to bear discomfort, and to recognize truths that others avoid. The intensity of reflection cultivates patience, humility, and an unflinching honesty with oneself. Though others may never fully understand, the thinker knows the landscape of their own mind intimately, charting its peaks and valleys with clarity born of confrontation. Within this crucible of solitude, the thinker begins to perceive the subtle rhythms of their own mind, noticing how thoughts and feelings are rarely linear but spiral, fold back on themselves, and collide in unpredictable ways. Each reflection uncovers a hidden corner of the self, a place where fear and hope, desire and guilt, courage and hesitation coexist in uneasy balance. The thinker realizes that understanding oneself is not a task to be completed, but an ongoing dialogue, a negotiation between awareness and instinct, between memory and imagination. Time itself seems to stretch differently in this inner realm. Moments of reflection can feel eternal, while hours in the external world pass in a blur, disconnected from the intensity of internal discovery. In this suspended space, ordinary distractions lose their appeal, and the thinker becomes acutely aware of the subtle movements of the mind, the fleeting pang of regret, the whisper of an unacknowledged hope, the shadow of past mistakes, the flicker of potential that has yet to be realized. Every choice, even the most mundane, now feels laden with meaning, because the thinker understands that every thought echoes into action, and every action reverberates within the self. Relationships, once effortless, are now filtered through this lens of awareness. Conversations feel incomplete, laughter often hollow, and shared moments faintly distorted because the thinker perceives layers beneath the surface that others do not notice, or perhaps refuse to see. Yet this awareness is both a burden and a gift. It isolates, certainly, but it also sharpens the capacity for empathy, the ability to sense subtleties in human behavior that remain invisible to those content with surface-level understanding. The thinker begins to recognize that the loneliness accompanying overthinking is not a void but a laboratory of the soul, a place where patterns are observed, contradictions reconciled, and truths faced that the majority never dare to confront. Within this expansive solitude, imagination and reflection become intertwined. The mind becomes both canvas and sculptor, painting vivid scenes of what could be while simultaneously dissecting what is. Every emotion is amplified, every instinct questioned, and every thought interrogated. The thinker experiences a heightened awareness of impermanence, the fleeting nature of success, of approval, of happiness, of life itself, and this awareness deepens both the pain and the richness of existence. Ordinary joys are no longer enough, for the mind seeks intensity, significance, and understanding in all encounters. Even the simplest choices are dissected for meaning, and even the smallest decisions carry weight beyond their apparent scale. Yet this depth, while isolating, ultimately strengthens the thinker's character. Patience becomes instinctive, humility is learned through confrontation with the self, and honesty transforms from a principle into a lived reality. The thinker becomes attuned to contradictions not as problems to be solved but as realities to be acknowledged, learning to navigate the tension between strength and fragility, clarity and confusion, certainty and doubt. The internal dialogue sharpens the mind, cultivates self-responsibility, and fosters a profound understanding that growth is inseparable from discomfort, that freedom is inseparable from solitude, and that the journey toward self-knowledge is unending, demanding, and ultimately transformative. In this relentless exploration, the thinker discovers that the mind is not a passive observer but an active participant in life, a force shaping perception, emotion, and action simultaneously. Through the prolonged engagement with their own consciousness, the thinker realizes that the loneliness that initially seemed unbearable is, in fact, essential. It is within this profound isolation that identity is not only confronted but refined, sharpened, and ultimately accepted. The thinker learns that true understanding of oneself cannot exist without embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the joys, the fears, the desires, and the contradictions, and that in this acceptance lies not despair, but the foundation of a life lived with depth, authenticity, and the courage to face the self in its entirety. Through this process, isolation and reflection transform. What began as a burden becomes a framework for understanding, a necessary condition for self-awareness. The thinker discovers that while others may occupy the surface of life, it is in the depths that one encounters their truest self. And even if this journey separates them from others, it is precisely in this separation that freedom, insight, and authenticity are realized. And perhaps the ultimate question remains: if you think too much and remain alone, will this loneliness destroy you, or will it force you to face your own soul and discover freedom? Will you pay the price of your solitude, distant from the simplicity of others, to encounter your true self? Is overthinking punishment or a door? And when you step through it, will you find yourself, or will you lose yourself entirely?